Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You listen to the Coaches Panel.
James Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Hall, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. Welcome back to another episode of the 50 Most Relevant. The first 10 players are done. We are out of the 40s. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel, I've just uploaded a video in the past 24 hours with just another quick touch point of all of the players revealed in the 40s of the 50 Most Relevant. All the links, if you can't be bothered searching YouTube for it, are at coachespanel.tv. Just another bit of extra content to get you through the preseason. Now that we've gone through the 40s, we want to go back to the man that kicked off the 50 Most Relevant with me, and one of the regulars of the Coaches Panel that you know and love. Kane is on. Hello, mate. How are you?
Very well, MJ. Very excited about this player today. I think it's been a very interesting, first 10 or so players. There's been some guys in his line, which always makes it interesting when you're comparing guys. And this guy's, ahead of some pretty big players in the defensive line. You've already done Aaron Hall. You've already done
Daniel Rich.
Dawson. You've already done Daniel Rich. So those are some guys that I think, maybe get a bit of more of buzz. There's guys like Daniel Rich that obviously have such a good SuperCoach game and have proven that. And we've seen the way, Brisbane used him, and Aaron Hall, we know, was one of the players of the year last year. And then you've always got a player when they move club, like Jordan Dawson did, that gets a bit of extra attention.
That's true.
So I think it's really interesting that you put Short at this position. So I'm keen to hear why.
Yeah. I'm really intrigued to get into this one with you to see exactly what he could be. Let's talk about Jayden Short, just the 25 years of age, does retain that defender status, and has been a phenomenal pick for the last couple of years. For coaches that have jumped on board him. Last year, his top score in AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam was also a career high score, 122, while in SuperCoach. Not the ceiling we'd seen from him in the year prior, but still not too bad, 129 against the Pies in SuperCoach. We've already talked about that career high fantasy score against the Eagles, but in SuperCoach, his best ever score was a 169. Yeah, that's nice ceiling. Hey, it was against the Cats back in 2020. He's priced at an average of 93 in AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam, 98 in SuperCoach, and in that format, going to set you just marginally ahead of $535K, just over $780,000 in AFL Fantasy, and just a touch under AFL DreamTeam. It's just a touch under $800,000. And Kane, when we look over the past couple of years of what Richmond has been, Jayden Short has really emerged from being a bit player in 2017 and a little bit of 2018 to really over the past 24 months established himself as the rebounder, as the quarterback, and now for fantasy coaches as a genuine premium in our line.
Yeah, well, he had all the traits, didn't he, MJ? He's got that booming kick. He's got some genuine pace about him. So I think a lot of people thought these are traits that translate to fantasy. And they translate to fantasy because he's a guy you want the ball in his hand. He's very creative, as I said, whether it's by foot or by using his run. So, this is a guy who's got 114 games under his belt now. So this is the time where he should be entering his prime. And like you mentioned, 93 last year, 91 adjusted the year before, played all 39 games across the past 2 home and away seasons. And when you look at how that stacks up compared to the other defenders, only Jake Lloyd and Jack Crisp have scored more points, more total points than Jayden Short in the past 2 years.
Wow.
So we know how important durability is, whether it's draft or salary cap. So to have a guy that pretty much you're going to lock him in, he's going to be there for you every week, he's going to give you premium output.
Most weeks, yeah.
You can't really ask for too much more. And this is a guy that already has 50% share in the Tigers kicking. So you want to know why a lot of these defenders are consistent. When you're getting 3, 4, 5, somewhere up to even 10 kicks, basically for free each week.
Yeah.
That's why these floors are so high. And Jayden's already got that. He's taking 50%, like I said. Nick Boston was at 18. Bachar Houli was at 12. They were the second and third most for the Tigers. So, potentially there is even a couple more kick-ins that might come his way with Bachar out of the side. But when you've got durability like that and you've got some scoring power, and the funny thing is, MJ, you think back to what he did in the pre-season last year, that's what got him in a lot of teams for salary cap. He dropped an absolute monster score, an absolute 150-plus score. So there is ceiling in there. We just haven't seen it in an actual AFL-level game. So I still think with the way he scores, with that kick-to-handball ratio, I think there's one coming. And you think about if he does that this year, if he drops to 150 instead of 100, that can be where we see him really get towards triple figures, which is where I think he'll get to at some point in his career.
Yeah, it does feel like it's more a matter of time with Jayden rather than a hypothetical. I do think it's there. We break down this 2021 season across the formats. Like you said, really durable this year and last 22 games. The average of 93 in Dream Team and Fantasy was the 9 tons. Just the one over 120, but he did have 5 additional scores 90 plus. So we're talking 14 of 22 games, 90 plus. Just 4 scores sub 80 all year. So really, about 18% of games he's delivering you a sub 80, and 40% of games he's giving you a ton. So solid but not crazy, but he's ranked 6th for total points. So he's ahead of Jordan Dawson, who we alluded to just the other day in the 50 most relevant. And we lauded his consistency. Well, Shorts is arguably better in that format. 10th for averages, 9th for points. We go over to SuperCoach. Average of 98, 12 tons, 4 over 120, so a slightly better ceiling there. Just the 5 sub scores under 80, a ton in 54% of games last year. Ranked 6th for points in SuperCoach, 11th for averages. He ranks elite in so many different areas outside of it. Elite for total kicks, 3rd in the AFL for total rebound 50s last year. 10th for rebound gains, and 10th in total meters gained, should I say, and 6th for total bounces. So you're seeing that run and carry that he loves to have. And you're right, when he does have the ball, he's distributing by foot much more than by hand. These numbers we saw in 2021 echo what he did in 2020. An average of 97 in SuperCoach. 7 tons and just the 3 scores under 80 all year, while in Dream Team and Fantasy, an average of 73. You want to play the adjusted average game? Fine. It's a 91. 1 pure ton, 3 additional scores, 80 plus. Remember last year, in 2020, that is, last year, not in the current of 2021, in that season, 80 was the 100 of 2020. So we're seeing this guy, as you've mentioned it, build almost a monopoly on kick-ins, really become a reliable, durable option, is the primary rebounder, and then all it actually takes is their upside. I suppose the two things people are maybe hoping and looking for, Kane, is Bachar Houli out. Does that mean he becomes the primary user almost to exclusivity? And if he does, where could he get to in terms of ceiling and averages for us?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting, MJ, because I think a lot of people think there's a big difference when Bachar isn't in the team, and the numbers don't suggest there really is.
No.
Again, with Bachar last year, he played 12 games, averaged 92. In the 10 games without Bachar, he went at 95. So there is some difference, but nothing where you go, okay, wow, that's really, really stark. Bachar was out, and all of a sudden, Jayden Short started popping off these big ceiling games. It didn't seem to work like that. I think the interesting thing for me is the last 2 seasons, Richmond's ranked 13th for fantasy points. And you think, can the team improve that? Is there a game plan shift? We know, Richmond won 3 premierships off the back of that really quick, forward handball game, the run, the leg speed, just get the ball forward. And it wasn't a fantasy game, was it? Even when they were winning premierships, they weren't top of the tree in the fantasy rankings. But you think it only takes a slight shift, a small shift in the game plan, and maybe they want to possess the ball a little bit more. Maybe they want to go a little bit slower. They've got some marking targets in their team, with Lynch and Rewatch. Maybe they think we want to play a little bit slower. That gives me a bit of hope. If Tigers were the number one fantasy team.
Yep.
And, when they're at their best, and now you think, okay, maybe they are a bit more in the mid-pack, but this is a team that's 13th.
Yeah.
So any real improvement in that, it's going to give Short a real opportunity to score more. And again, if you're just thinking, okay, maybe I like the non-Bachar, those 10 games I mentioned without Bachar, where he went at 95. If you're thinking, okay, he's at 95 already, maybe he picks up a kick in. I think you can really easily build a narrative where he's right on the fringe of 100. And when I look at the guys that can go over 100, there's only two that I have a lot of confidence in if they're fit in the defence that will go over 100 in DT.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Lockie Whitfield and it's Aaron Hall, both of which have injury issues.
Yes.
And some would say have role in Aaron Hall's case, because that role, which he played beautifully, you flagged in the other podcast, could that change? Could they have multiple users coming out of defence? Could they, limit the amount of entries that come in to their defence? And there's a lot of things. But I think we saw how good Aaron Hall was, and even a regression of 15 points from his, uninjured games has him above 100.
Yeah.
Whitfield, we know, can genuinely challenge to be the number one fantasy player in the game, including all lines. Jake Lloyd, we saw Sydney had multiple avenues. We saw Dawson play up higher in the ground. But there wasn't that reliance there was in the past.
No.
MJ, there wasn't that reliance to go
Lloyd or bust, yep.
Lloyd or bust. And funnily enough, they were the number one fantasy team last year, Sydney. So you're thinking, okay, how I don't see the world where Lloyd just does bounce back to that,
110s,
I think he just is sort of stable at 98. And my point with all this is, if I think Short can get close enough to a Lloyd, to a Chris, to a Stewart, to these guys that are in his range, those guys like a Rich, I think he can match them. And if he's matching them
at a cheaper price,
and he's got impeccable durability.
Yep.
Like, as I said, the two guys that I think you'd be tempted to start over him are Whitfield and Hall because of the upside. They are so volatile that if you don't start them, they could be putting 120s on you for the first couple months.
And you won't be able to get them in time before your season's over. Yeah.
And as you always say, MJ, too, now you elevate the injury risk.
Yep.
Oh, my God, Aaron Hall's flown out of the gates, 120. I know there's always injuries, but now I'm going to trade into the injury.
Yeah, correct.
Like, that's why you always want to start with them. So my point with Short is, as much as I love him, I think it's going to be hard structurally to fit him into a lot of teams, because I think most people are going to want Hall and Whitfield if they're fit, and if they're in the role, and if the chat, whether it's via the pre-season or just via the club says, Aaron Hall is going to continue on. He was so good. Lockie Whitfield is fit. He's going to play his role. Like, that's two guys that you can't really turn down, especially in your DT and SuperCoach. I think we know in AF there's a lot more value consideration, but in those other ones where you're sort of picking guys and really you are going to own them for the whole year.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people want the safety of a Lloyd. So I think you are getting the same player at a cheaper price. So for me, I would start Short over Lloyd for that reason, just because I think the gap narrows, the durability is the same. But I think a lot of people will find it hard to fit Short into their team when you've got a couple of premiums.
Yes.
And we know there's some guy, you did Wayne Miller, you've mentioned George Hewitt. Those are two good examples that if things look right in the preseason, they'll be really popular due to their price. So I think it's going to be hard for a lot of people to fit him in, but I think people should give him more thought.
I think that's a really nice summation. Here's what it looks like. If you're into Jayden Short, this is the story you're telling yourself. Last year in 2021, he averaged 3.4 points per game in AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam in 10 games, up to that 95, which you mentioned. In SuperCoach, he averaged 12.3 points per game, up to that 105. So the narrative as a Short owner is, I see a little bit of upside. Yes, the basement might be the thing that's been holding you there and might have been for some the reason that you hadn't considered him to now, because he historically hasn't had that huge ceiling of frequency there. But you go, I see the potential upside with no Houli. I think then I'm going to bank in him as a D3 because I don't see many people, like you say, putting him at D2 or D1. I fit a D3 in my side and Short sits perfectly as a safety net that I can see upside. That's the narrative you're telling yourself if you're going to pick Jayden Short. Equally, if you're going to not start with Jayden Short, it's because I think Hall's got better ceiling. I think Whitfield's got a ceiling, or contrary to kind of what you said, I do think Lloyd goes back to being Mr. 105, Mr. 110, Mr. 115. So I'll pick those guys, and I don't see the ceiling of Short, and so therefore I'll target him as an upgrade target because I'll get him at a comparable price, if not marginally cheaper, if he doesn't deliver the big 115, 120, 130 scores early. So I think those are the two conversations you need to tell yourself with Jayden Short. Is there upside? How do you see that coming? And is that justifiable? And if it is, well, now all of a sudden you have a conversation about whether or not he fits your structure. If you don't see that upside, then you're right. He absolutely is just an upgrade option. For me, I've got him in a couple of formats because I think there's enough data to suggest there is upside. I love his consistency. I see some upside statistically and just intuitively. I see it. I just don't see a world where he's not a top 10 defender at worst. At best, I think he can rival being a top 2 to 3 guy.
Yeah, well, again, and the thing as well that makes it easier for me to not start Short with the current, as we mentioned, the Whitfields and the Halls and maybe those cheaper guys, is that he is very consistent. So typically what happens is, the magic numbers at its highest point at the start of the season, Short just does his thing. Let's just say it's to 95. He's going at 95. And then in about around 7 or 8, you start looking for your upgrades. And you go, oh, Short's a good price. He's sort of just been peppering around his 95. And you bring him in. And that's why, I know personally I'm of the belief, if there's guys that can burn me, I want to start them.
Yes.
I know there's risk. I know, that some people are volatile, like just say, a Hall could be volatile. But I want to reap the rewards. I want to win. You want to be finishing as high as possible. So if it blows up, I'd rather it blow up with me trying to go with a guy that can win it for me. But some people don't look at it like that. Some people go, no, I don't want to do that. I want to just take the safe guy, the durable guy. They will probably be more attracted to Jayden Short. But the funny thing in their salary cap games is nothing's ever in isolation. And as glowing as I've been about Jayden Short, I think it is actually the other players that you have available to you that make it really difficult to start him in your side. Now, maybe, for example, MJ, we get inundated with forward rookies. And we know last year was a structure where a lot of people started the season with 4 or 5 premium backs. Yeah. Because that's what the game gave us. So if the game goes that way and we come out of the preseason and we feel really good, maybe about a Braden Proof, maybe we feel good about a couple of forward rookies, and all of a sudden we're looking for, okay, we need to actually get some premium guys in our team. Yeah. Maybe that's where Jayden Short becomes a possibility. But I think he's just a safe guy, top 6. And again, I would not be shocked if the season ends and he's the number 1 total point scorer in DT. Yep. And possibly in SuperCoach as well. But I think in DT I can see the path. And the path would be an Aaron Hall and Lockie Whitfield missing games and Jayden Short not. Yes. That's where I rate him. And again, you probably need a few things in the game in other positions to really determine if you can start with him. Yeah, I see a very common structure at the moment is people running 2 premium defenders and then starting through some value options, whether it be the already revealed Miller and Hewitt from the 50 most relevant, seeing James Sicily in a bunch of other teams, and then there's the guys like a Josh Sand, a Darcy Wilmot, for the evergreen Will Gould, there's these guys that are always there. So you're right, it will be interesting to see what do the players around allow, because I don't see anybody starting him at D2. Like, they could, but I just don't see the upside confidence to that. So it's got to be around, as you said, all the elements around him to give you that confidence to start him both with upside
and to bank that consistency. So he's got to be in the mix. He's got to be a watch list. I don't think you can lock him into either upgrade only or start only. I think he's in consideration. And injury is the only thing for me that I can see stopping him from being a top 5 to 10 performer across the year. With that upside that you said, he could. There's a world where he could turn into being one of the best points total options for us in that back line. But draft is fascinating to me for where he goes, because one of the best tools that you can give coaches on draft day is pretty flawless availability and always being there every single week and building around a guy that's not going to burn you with poor scores. So that's in Jayden's favour. But the top-end mids are really good this year. The top-end forwards, I see there's a really clear top 3 in that forward line and a top couple in the back line. So where people and how people choose to go about their draft could ultimately form where he lands. He's going to be a D1 for someone, no doubt about that. But Kane, I see a world where he could slip into the 5th round. I think 4th's probably more likely, but I do see a world where he could slip as late into the 5th round in some leagues.
Yeah, well, again, this is where it gets a bit interesting, isn't it? Because now we don't have to worry about price. So for me, Hall and Whitfield clearly above, clearly with that upside. Now, in this case as well, for me, Lloyd and Chris both above. Because, again, I'm not worried about price. I think they're close enough. But, again, you've got 2 guys in Chris and Lloyd. They were the 2 players I said have beaten Jayden Short across the last 2 years for total points. And they're just absolute rocks in the prime of their career. So, for me, he's probably the 5th defender off the board that I would personally take.
Yep.
Now, I know ranges can get confusing for people, so I might, instead of giving a round range, because I know some people play 8 teams, some people play 16. I think in this season, he's probably a guy that goes off the board. I would have to say between 35 and 45. That's probably the range where you feel good. And it is because of the mid. I think there's so many good mids. We typically use, you've got to add 10 points to a defender and a forward to get their sort of relative value to a mid. And I think there's a lot of really, really good mids that you feel safe with. And I think, as you always mentioned, it is somewhat simple often in the season, depending on the size of your league, to find streaming options in the forward line and defence. So that's why people really value those mids, because it's not easy to do that for mids. It's not easy to pick a matchup where the mids really dominate, whereas there's often some, as you said, in the forwards, if you know there's a small forward who might play in a 60-point win, you can really capitalise on that. So I think, I've probably got him closer to 35 than 45, but I think that would be a range because there'll be some people who do have, a Dawson ahead of him. There's some people that will have a Heffel.
Rich,
will have,
whatever. That's fine. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's the range where I'd be feeling really comfortable. If I got him at 35, I feel like that's fine. I think I'm going to get some value. Now, if he slides to 45, I think you're really happy. And he will in some drafts, just by the nature of where people value the other defenders. Tom Stewart, I've probably been a little bit disrespectful to.
Sure.
He's a guy that really doesn't let you down. But that's where I've got Short, Fink back, probably in the 30s. So, that's midway through the 4th round for mine.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair summation. Hey, man, appreciate your work today on this episode of the 50 Most Relevant, talking about Jayden Short.
No worries, MJ.
If you want to go and check out the article on him or any of the other players revealed so far in the 50 Most Relevant, I've dropped it online for you now at coachespanel.tv. While you're there, all the links to join our Patreon supporter group where there's cash league prizes, there's hidden groups, articles, and a bunch of other stuff that you can get involved. There's a cash tier that is right for you. All the links to get involved and see how you could support the Coaches Panel are at coachespanel.tv. That video I mentioned at the top of the episode, kind of recapping the first 10 players of the 50 most relevant or the first 5 Crows players of the 50 most relevant. You go and check that out there. Don't worry, friends. You don't see much of the pride of South Australia from here on in through the 50 most relevant. You can go and check that out on YouTube. And, of course, all these podcasts are dropping every single day at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Make sure you leave a 5-star rating and a nice little review, as well as following us so that you get notified as soon as they land every single morning. All right, tomorrow in the 50 most relevant, you need a clue? I'll tell you, here's a clue. The player's name got said in the past 4 minutes. There's a clue. Who did we just say the name of that is getting appearances in the 50 most relevant tomorrow? I'll even make it even easier for you. Kane said the person's name. He just rattled off a bunch of different players very quickly in the draft segment. Who is appearing in the 50 most relevant tomorrow? You might be able to guess if you go back and have a listen. You find out tomorrow, Coaches Panel, friends and family members, when we reconsider all the options of who are the most relevant players in 2022.